Have you ever actually sat down and crunched the numbers on your monthly electric bill to see exactly how much cash you're burning through every single year? And think about this. When the power randomly cuts out, what is your literal first reaction? For 99% of us, it's a mad dash to the junk drawer. We're frantically digging around in the dark for a flashlight or some loose batteries. And when you finally find that half-open pack of AA's you bought who knows when, honestly, it's a total coin toss whether they even have any juice left. If you're lucky, maybe they'll keep the lights on for a single night. But what happens if the grid is down for 3 days? Or a whole freaking week? And let's be real here. Even if you're the type of person who diligently stocks up on batteries for emergencies, have you ever actually checked on those alkaline batteries sitting in your drawer for the last 2 years? Half the time, the seams are already crusty and leaking. That's battery acid seeping out, and the second it touches the circuit board of your emergency radio, the whole thing is completely fried. You thought you were prepping for a disaster, but you were basically just hoarding little ticking time bombs. But the real fundamental issue here is this. Even if the battery works perfectly, how long is it actually gonna last? Running a flashlight? Maybe 5 or 6 hours? Keeping an emergency radio on? You might squeeze by until the next morning. But if you're stuck in a blackout for 3, 5, or 7 days? Here's the ugly truth about alkaline batteries. Their core design logic was never meant to give you actual independence. They are literally designed to just keep you coming back to the store to buy more. But right there in that exact same kitchen, you have something you probably use every single day, and nobody has ever told you that it can literally generate electricity. It never needs to be plugged in, it will never leak acid, and it literally has no expiration date. And the best part? All the materials combined will cost you less than $2. I'm talking about a simple glass of salt water, a scrap of copper wire, and a basic galvanized iron nail. I know, you're probably rolling your eyes right now thinking this sounds like total clickbait. But the chemical logic backing this up is 100% real and proven. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jared Min. Every day, I'm here exposing the everyday secrets they don't want you to know. Let's take it back to basic 8th grade chemistry really quick. It's not complicated, I promise. Whenever you drop 2 different types of metal into an electrolyte solution, they kick off what's called an oxidation-reduction reaction. The more active metal starts shedding electrons, and those electrons literally sprint from one side to the other. That physical flow, that is an electrical current. This exact principle was first proven way back in 1800 by Alessandro Volta when he stacked copper and zinc discs in salt water. It was called the Voltaic pile, and it was literally the first stable power source in human history. And as it turns out, copper and zinc are one of the absolute most stable metal pairings you can use for this reaction. And a galvanized iron nail? Galvanized literally just means it's coated in a heavy layer of pure zinc. So, you drop that copper wire and that zinc-coated nail into some salt water, and a 200-year-old, totally proven chemical reaction quietly powers up and goes to work. But you're probably wondering, is the energy density actually enough to be useful? Well, in 2019, the University of Maryland's Energy Research Center published a massive study on this. By using a highly concentrated saltwater solution, they successfully pumped out a totally stable 4.0 volts of electricity. For context, that is the exact same working voltage as the highly engineered lithium-ion battery sitting inside your smartphone right now. But here is the crazy part. After putting it through 1,000 complete charge and discharge cycles, the saltwater setup still held a 98.1% energy retention rate. Think about your smartphone for a second. After just 400 charges, your phone's battery capacity has probably already tanked to below 80%. So we're not talking about some fringe back alley science experiment here. This is a legitimate, peer-reviewed paper from a top-tier university energy lab. So that begs a massive question, right? If the science is this rock solid, why can't you find a commercial saltwater battery on the shelves anywhere? The answer really comes down to 2 main things. Part 1 is a legitimate technical hurdle. The issue with early saltwater batteries was that the output voltage of a single cell was pretty low, and the capacity was limited. To get any actual usable power out of it, you have to wire a bunch of them together in a series, which is honestly a bit too much of a hassle for the average consumer. That's an objective limitation. It's not a corporate conspiracy, it's just the laws of physics. Part 2? The money. Let's rewind back to the year 1920. A United States Navy engineer named George McDaniel ran a crazy test right on the deck of a battleship. He grabbed a glass jar, a spool of copper wire, a sheet of zinc, and a bag of basic rock salt. He mixed up an electrolyte at a ratio of about 35 grams of salt per liter of water. In under 90 seconds, his voltmeter was showing a rock-solid reading. He then hooked that crude setup up to a military telegraph transmitter, and it ran flawlessly for 16 hours straight. If you adjust for inflation, the total cost of the materials for that rig today would be about $1.87. This tech was so bulletproof that it was actually written right into the World War II field manuals, and the United States Navy standardized it for the emergency survival kits on their life rafts. The logic was foolproof. You don't have wall outlets on a life raft, and you definitely don't have battery chargers. But you are surrounded by an ocean of salt water, and you have metal. That's all you need to survive. But then, 1947 hit, and the consumer battery market absolutely exploded. Union Carbide, which was the biggest battery manufacturer on the planet at the time, started aggressively lobbying to force the entire consumer electronics industry to standardize battery compartments. Suddenly, every radio, flashlight, and remote control was physically designed so that it could only fit a very specific cylindrical alkaline battery. Once the entire hardware market was hard-locked into that standard shape, non-standard DIY solutions like the saltwater battery just naturally vanished from the public eye. It didn't disappear because it was a bad technology. It disappeared because it couldn't give you a reason to become a repeat customer. Think about it. You literally cannot patent tap water and table salt. You cannot build a $240 billion global empire around a homemade rig that literally anyone can slap together for $2. This doesn't even need to be some dark, smoke-filled room conspiracy. Basic, ruthless business logic naturally kills off any technology that doesn't let companies continuously siphon money out of your wallet. And today, that gatekeeping is even more invisible. The International Electrotechnical Commission is the body that sets the global tech standards and certifications for batteries. Over the last few decades, those rulebooks have been completely rewritten to perfectly fit the technical quirks of lithium batteries. So even if a brilliant saltwater battery design hits all the performance marks, if it wants to enter the consumer market, it has to pass a certification test that was literally rigged for a completely different technology. And that is exactly why the University of Maryland can publish groundbreaking papers and clean energy scientists can praise the tech. But when you walk into Walmart, you're still only ever going to see alkaline and lithium on the shelves. But honestly, the core physics of this never actually went away. Let me share a few wild true stories with you. During World War II, there were tons of fighter pilots in the Pacific Theater who got shot down and spent days drifting in the ocean praying for a rescue. The emergency radios they used to call for help, they were powered by those exact Navy-issued saltwater battery packs. No wall chargers, no backup Duracells. Just a piece of metal, ocean water, and a chemical reaction keeping them alive for dozens of hours until they could beam out an SOS. Around that same time, British combat engineers fighting in North Africa were doing the exact same thing. Whenever supply chains broke down, they would literally scavenge copper pipes, scrap iron, and their own ration salt to rig up emergency power banks for their field radios. Even today, down at the research stations in Antarctica, the insane sub-zero temperatures will literally freeze and kill standard lithium batteries. So guess what? Some of those stations still keep saltwater electrochemical rigs as their absolute last line of defense for emergency comms. Because when you strip away precision manufacturing, basic materials are everywhere. In the most brutal, unforgiving environments on Earth, the simplest chemistry is actually the most reliable. In 2002, a high school kid in Ohio showed up to his science fair with a project where he used recycled aluminum soda cans and salt water to power a whole row of LED lights for 30 days straight. He got a decent grade, and then the project just completely vanished into the school archives. No venture capital, no viral news stories, nothing. When you line all these stories up, it doesn't prove that there are men in black suppressing the tech. It highlights a much more grounded reality. When you are totally broke, out of resources, and the infrastructure around you collapses, human beings instinctively fall back on the raw laws of chemistry to survive. These principles have been here the whole time. They never stopped working. It's just that when times are good, nobody feels like they need to use them. Right up until the moment the grid goes completely dark. So, after hearing all this, you're probably wondering, if the power completely cuts out at your house tonight and you only have access to stuff you can grab at the grocery store, can you actually build a working power source yourself? Yes, absolutely. Let me walk you through exactly how to do it, step by step. First, let's gather your materials. Everything combined. is going to cost you less than $7. And you can grab it all at any basic hardware store or supermarket. Number 1, 18-gauge copper wire. Any hardware store has this for a couple of bucks. Honestly, if you have an old broken appliance lying around, you can just strip the copper wire right out of the power cord. Just make sure you hit the bare wire with a little bit of sandpaper to rub off any oxidation so it conducts electricity better. Number 2, galvanized iron nails. Just standard, everyday galvanized nails from the hardware aisle. Nothing fancy. But the galvanized part is non-negotiable. That means it's coated in zinc. And the zinc is the active metal fueling the whole reaction. You absolutely cannot swap these for stainless steel nails. It won't work. Number 3, non-iodized salt. This is super important. Do not use regular table salt. The potassium iodide in normal salt will completely screw up the electrochemical reaction and give you a super unstable output. You can usually find non-iodized salt or pure kosher salt in the baking aisle, and it costs exactly the same. Number 4, a glass jar or a plastic cup. Anything around 16 ounces is perfect. Just rate your recycling bin for a clean container. Number 5, wire leads and alligator clips. You use these to chain the cells together. You can grab a cheap pack at the hardware store or just cannibalize wires from broken electronics. That's literally it. You don't need a soldering iron and you don't need any specialized tools. Once you've got your gear, we need to mix the electrolyte. Pay close attention here, because getting this right is honestly more critical than the assembly part. You're going to take 35 grams of your non-iodized salt, which is about 2 big tablespoons, and dissolve it into 1 liter of room temperature tap water. Stir it like crazy for about 90 seconds until every single grain is completely dissolved and the water is clear. Why 35 grams? Because that specific ratio perfectly mimics the natural salinity of ocean water. It creates the absolute perfect ion concentration for copper and zinc to react efficiently. If you go too light on the salt, there aren't enough ions and your current will be super weak. If you dump way too much in, it just turns into sludge and blocks the electrical flow. Now for the assembly steps. Take your copper wire and cut a piece about 4 inches long. Bend it into a hook or an L shape and hang it right over the lip of your glass jar. You want one end submerged deep into the salt water and the other end sticking out the top so you can attach a wire to it. Next, grab one of your galvanized nails and drop it into the exact same jar, making sure it sits parallel to the copper. Same deal, mostly submerged, but leave the head sticking out of the top to attach your wire. Now, here is the one rule you absolutely cannot break. The copper wire and the iron nail cannot physically touch each other underwater. The second those two metals make contact, you create a short circuit, the chemical reaction instantly flatlines, and that cell is totally dead. If your jar is kind of narrow, just jam a little piece of cardboard between them to keep them separated. Just one of these jars running on its own is going to generate about 1.1 volts. What can you actually do with one jar? You could maybe power a tiny little LED bulb, and that's about it. But if you chain 3 of these jars together in a series, boom, you're suddenly pushing 3.3 volts. How do you do that? Take an alligator clip and connect the nail from jar 1 to the copper wire in jar 2. Then, connect the nail from jar 2 to the copper wire in jar 3. Finally, your actual power output comes from the copper wire in jar 1 and the nail in jar 3. 3 chain jars giving you 3.3 volts is plenty of juice to run a bright emergency LED lantern or power a small USB device. If you actually want to charge your dead smartphone, you just need to wire in a tiny USB boost module to bump that 3.3 volts up to a stable 5 volts. You can search DC-DC boost converter on Amazon right now and buy a handful for like $5. Toss them in a drawer so you have them when the grid fails. And here's the beauty of this. Unlike a lithium power bank, you don't just throw this away when it dies. The way a saltwater battery works is that the zinc is slowly eaten away by oxidation. As it runs, you're going to start seeing this grayish, cloudy gunk building up on the nail. That is a completely normal sign that the chemistry is working. Eventually, when you notice your lights getting dim or the voltage dropping, that's just your cue that it's time for some maintenance. Maintaining the rig is ridiculously easy. You just pull the nail out, hit it with some sandpaper to scrape off the gray gunk, or honestly, just toss it and drop a brand new 2-cent galvanized nail in there. While you're at it, just top off the jar with a little splash of fresh salt water to keep the concentration up. The whole tune-up takes maybe 5 minutes. You only need to top off the water every 3 days or so, swap the nails out maybe once a week or two, and the copper wire? You basically never have to replace it. There's actually a guy online who spent about $200 building a massive 110-cell saltwater battery bank in his garage, and he legitimately slashed his monthly electric bill. Now look, I'm not saying you need to go full mad scientist like that, but what his crazy project proves is that this fundamental principle is infinitely scalable. The bigger you build it, the more stable the power gets. Wiring up 3 jars is the exact same logic as wiring up 30. You're just chaining more links together. Alessandro Volta used this exact science to light up the dark 200 years ago. George McDaniel used it to run a warship's comms for 16 hours straight a century ago. World War II pilots literally bet their lives on it while stranded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. These laws of physics never vanished, and they certainly never stopped working. They're literally just sitting quietly in the baking aisle at your grocery store, just waiting for you to pick them up.